Dear friends, audience members and listeners, hold on to your screens, folks, this is not a drill. China just dropped an energy bombshell so massive, it's rewriting the global rulebook, in lightning speed. We're talking an industrial powerhouse so huge, it makes past giants look like tiny toys. Cheap electricity. AI dominance. A new world order powered by watts. Buckle up, this ride's about to blow your mind.
All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're looking at a source that makes a really bold claim, that China has quietly become the world's first true electric kingdom. We're talking about a power infrastructure so massive it's already starting to reshape global industry, and believe it or not, the future of technology itself. So to even begin to grasp the scale of what we're talking about, the source material uses this very striking metaphor, the industrial Cthulhu. Yeah, it's a pretty provocative term, right? But it's designed to capture this feeling of a power so vast, so all-encompassing, that it's almost hard for us to wrap our heads around. Here's the game plan for today. First, we're going to unpack that whole industrial Cthulhu idea. Then, we'll get into the hard numbers that are driving all this. After that, we'll uncover the secret sauce, what the source calls the cabbage price strategy, and see how that's affecting global industry and the AI race. And finally, we'll look at where this is all headed.
So what do they actually mean by an industrial Cthulhu? This isn't just a fancy way of saying really big. The source is arguing that this is something on a completely different level from anything we've ever seen before in history.
Look, history has had its share of industrial giants, right? You think of Victorian Britain or America during World War II. But the source claims China isn't just the next one in line, it's a whole new category. The idea is that it's a force so enormous that its true scale is almost unknowable. It's an industrial base that is, quite simply, beyond our previous experience as a species.
Okay, so that's the big, almost sci-fi concept. But is there any truth to it? Well, this is where we need to ground this idea in reality, because the source backs it all up with some absolutely mind-blowing statistics on energy.
And get this, we're not just talking about what already exists. This is about what's being built right now. According to the source, China is currently constructing a whopping 80% of the world's new coal power plants. But at the same time, it's also building 70% of new solar and 50%, half, of all new hydro and wind projects on the planet. It's a full-spectrum energy build-out like we've never seen.
So, what's the result of all that construction? Well, the source says that last year, China's electricity generation officially crossed the 10 trillion kilowatt-hour mark. That is an almost unimaginable amount of power. It's a record for any single country in all of human history. But honestly, even that number doesn't quite do it justice.
This is where it really clicks. That 10 trillion kilowatt-hours, it's more than double the entire annual output of the United States. But here's the kicker. The source points out that China's electricity generation is now pretty much equal to the entire G7 combined. That's the US, the UK, Germany, France, Japan, Italy, and Canada, all of them together.
Okay, but why? Why build all this? You don't do something on this scale just to break records. The source says no. There is a very simple but incredibly powerful strategic goal driving this whole thing. It all comes down to one thing: price. The data from the source is crystal clear. In China, a kilowatt-hour of electricity costs, on average, about half a yuan. Now compare that to the US, where it's more than double. And then look at Europe, where it's nearly 5 times as expensive. This massive price difference isn't an accident. It's the whole point of the strategy.
And this brings us to that second key metaphor: cabbage price. The idea is to make electricity so ridiculously abundant that it becomes as cheap as a basic vegetable. This is not just about keeping the lights on. The source claims this is about using low-cost energy as an economic weapon to completely rewrite the rules of the global economy.
So what happens when you have electricity that's cabbage price cheap? Well, the first major consequence, according to the source, is that it allows China to essentially lock down its dominance over global manufacturing.
The source calls this the downward luck. And the logic is actually pretty simple. You see, basic manufacturing, making textiles, toys, simple electronics, uses a ton of electricity. For a lot of these businesses, power is their number 2 expense, sometimes even costing more than what they pay their workers. So when China makes that power dirt cheap, it creates a cost advantage that other developing countries just can't compete with. It basically slams the door on them.
And if you want a perfect example, look at the textile industry.
You hear all the time that China's labor costs are rising, so factories should be moving to places like Vietnam or India. But the source points out that China is still, by far, the world's #1 textile producer. Why? It's simple math. The money a company saves on its crazy cheap electricity bill in China is more than the extra they spend on labor. The energy advantage is just that big. So that's the downward lock on traditional industries. But the source argues this strategy also creates an upward lock, one that affects the most important technology of our future: artificial intelligence.
The source actually references an assessment that's attributed to NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang. It breaks down the AI race into 3 key parts. The US, it says, clearly has the lead in designing the most advanced AI chips. But, and this is a big but, China has the advantage in applying AI to the market, and critically, it has the advantage in electricity supply. So from that perspective, it's a 2-to-1 lead for China.
And that electricity advantage is about to become a very, very big deal. You see, AI is unbelievably power-hungry. The source cites projections that by 2030, the global AI industry will need over 94 billion kilowatt-hours a year. That is a colossal amount of energy, and whoever can provide that much power cheaply and reliably is going to have a massive strategic edge. And this is where that massive build-out really pays off. The source draws a sharp contrast between China's stable low-cost grid and vulnerabilities elsewhere, pointing to things like the Texas blackouts in the US. What some critics used to call China's overinvestment in things like solar and wind, well, now it looks less like an overinvestment and more like a brilliant strategic move, creating a giant energy surplus just in time for the AI revolution.
So all of this brings us to the final part of the story, the source's grand conclusion about where this whole thing is going. Because this isn't just about dominating manufacturing or winning the AI race. It's about creating a fundamentally new economic model for the entire world.
So, the endgame presented in the source is a vision where China becomes the world's first truly electricity-based economy. Once its own domestic industry is completely powered and secured, the next logical step is to start exporting all that cheap, abundant power through ultra-high-voltage grids, creating a new, China-centric global order built on electricity. And that leaves us with a pretty heavy question to think about. If electricity really is the foundational resource of the 21st century, powering everything from our factories to our data centers, what does it actually mean if the production of that resource becomes overwhelmingly concentrated in just one country? A very powerful thought to end on. Thanks for tuning in.